Welcome to Mystery Vault Stories. In The Circular Staircase by Mary Roberts Rinehart, we follow the thrilling journey of a middle-aged woman who, in search of peace and quiet, unknowingly steps into a world of mystery and danger. A seemingly ordinary summer retreat soon becomes the site of inexplicable events, eerie occurrences, and a crime that keeps everyone on edge. Join us as we uncover the secrets hidden within the walls of Sunnyside and embark on a detective tale full of suspense and twists. I Take a Country House. This is the story of how a middle-aged spinster lost her mind. Deserted I Take a Country House. This is the story of how a middle-aged spinster lost her mind. Deserted crimes that keep our newspapers and detective agencies happy and prosperous. For 20 years, I had been perfectly comfortable. For 20 years, I had had the window boxes filled in the spring, the carpets lifted, the awnings put up, and the furniture covered with brown linen. For as many summers, I had said goodbye to my friends, and after watching their perspiring hegira, had settled down to a delicious quiet in town, where the mail comes 3 times a day, and the water supply does not depend on a tank on the roof. And then, the madness seized me. When I look back over the months I spent at Sunnyside, I wonder that I survived it all. As it is, I show the wear and tear of my harrowing experiences. I have turned very gray, Liddy reminded me of it, only yesterday, by saying that a little bluing in the rinse water would make my hair silvery instead of a yellowish white. I hate to be reminded of unpleasant things, and I snapped her off. No, I said sharply, I'm not going to use bluing at my time of life, or starch either. Liddy's nerves are gone, she says, since that awful summer, but she has enough left, goodness knows. And when she begins to go around with a lump in her throat, all I have to do is to threaten to return to Sunnyside, and she is frightened into a semblance of cheerfulness, from which you may judge that the summer there was anything but a success. The newspaper accounts have been so garbled and incomplete. One of them mentioned me but once, and then only as the tenant at the time the thing happened, that I feel it my due to tell what I know. Mr. Jameson, the detective, said himself he could never have done without me, although he gave me little enough credit in print. I shall have to go back several years, 13 to be exact, to start my story. At that time my brother died, leaving me his 2 children. Halsey was 11 then, and Gertrude was 7. All the responsibilities of maternity were thrust upon me suddenly. To perfect the profession of motherhood requires precisely as many years as the child has lived, like the man who started to carry the calf and ended by walking along with the bull on his shoulders. However, I did the best I could. When Gertrude got past the hair ribbon age, and Halsey asked for a scarf pin and put on long trousers, and a wonderful help that was to the darning, I sent them away to good schools. After that, my responsibility was chiefly postal, with 3 months every summer in which to replenish their wardrobes, look over their lists of acquaintances, and generally to take my foster motherhood out of its 9 months retirement in camphor. I missed the summers with them when somewhat later, at boarding school and college, the children spent much of their vacations with friends. Gradually, I found that my name signed to a check was even more welcome than when signed to a letter, though I wrote them at stated intervals. But when Halsey had finished his electrical course and Gertrude her boarding school, and both came home to stay, things were suddenly changed. The winter Gertrude came out was nothing but a succession of sitting up late at night to bring her home from things, taking her to the dressmakers between naps the next day, and discouraging ineligible youths with either more money than brains or more brains than money. Also, I acquired a great many things. To say lingerie for undergarments, frocks, and gowns, instead of dresses, and that beardless sophomores are not college boys, but college men. Halsey required less personal supervision, and as they both got their mother's fortune that winter, my responsibility became purely moral. Halsey bought a car, of course, and I learned how to tie over my bonnet a gray baize veil, and, after a time, never to stop to look at the dogs when I was run down. People are apt to be so unpleasant about their dogs. The additions to my education made me a properly equipped maiden aunt, and by spring I was quite tractable. So when Halsey suggested camping in the Adirondacks and Gertrude wanted Bar Harbor, we compromised on a good country house with links near, within motor distance of town and telephone distance of the doctor. That was how we went to Sunnyside. We went out to inspect the property, and it seemed to deserve its name. Its cheerful appearance gave no indication whatever of anything out of the ordinary. Only one thing seemed unusual to me. The housekeeper, who had been left in charge, had moved from the house to the gardener's lodge a few days before. As the lodge was far enough away from the house, it seemed to me that either fire or thieves could complete their work of destruction undisturbed. The property was an extensive one. The house on the top of a hill, which sloped away in great stretches of green lawn and clipped hedges to the road. And across the valley, perhaps a couple of miles away, was the Greenwood Clubhouse. Gertrude and Halsey were infatuated. "Why, it's everything you want," Halsey said. "View, air, good water, and good roads. As for the house, it's big enough for a hospital if it has a Queen Anne front and a Mary Anne back," which was ridiculous. It was pure Elizabethan. Of course we took the place. It was not my idea of comfort, being much too large and sufficiently isolated to make the servant question serious. But I give myself credit for this. Whatever has happened since, I never blamed Halsey and Gertrude for taking me there. And another thing, if the series of catastrophes there did nothing else, it taught me one thing, that somehow, somewhere, from perhaps a half-civilized ancestor who wore a sheepskin garment and trailed his food or his prey, I have in me the instinct of the chase. Were I a man, I should be a trapper of criminals, trailing them as relentlessly as no doubt my sheepskin ancestor did his wild boar. But being an unmarried woman with the handicap of my sex, my first acquaintance with crime will probably be my last. Indeed, it came near enough to being my last acquaintance with anything. The property was owned by Paul Armstrong, the president of the Traders Bank, who at the time we took the house was in the West with his wife and daughter, and a Dr. Walker, the Armstrong family physician. Halsey knew Louise Armstrong, had been rather attentive to her the winter before, but as Halsey was always attentive to somebody, I had not thought of it seriously, although she was a charming girl. I knew of Mr. Armstrong only through his connection with the bank, where the children's money was largely invested, and through an ugly story about the son, Arnold Armstrong, who was reported to have forged his father's children's money was largely invested, and through an ugly story about the son, Arnold Armstrong, who was reported to have forged his father's name for a considerable amount to some bank paper. However, the story had had no interest for me. I cleared Halsey and Gertrude away to a house party and moved out to Sunnyside the 1st of May. The roads were bad, but the trees were in leaf, and there were still tulips in the borders around the house. The arbutus was fragrant in the woods under the dead leaves, and on the way from the station, a short mile, while the car stuck in the mud, I found a bank showered with tiny forget-me-nots. The birds, don't ask me what kind. They all look alike to me, unless they have a hallmark of some bright color. The birds were chirping in the hedges and everything breathed of peace. Liddy, who was born and bred on a brick pavement, got a little bit down-spirited when the crickets began to chirp or scrape their legs together, or whatever it is they do at twilight. The first night passed quietly enough. I have always been grateful for that one night's peace. It shows what the country might be under favorable circumstances. Never after that night did I put my head on my pillow with any assurance how long it would be there, or on my shoulders for that matter. On the following morning, Liddy and Mrs. Ralston, my own housekeeper, had a difference of opinion, and Mrs. Ralston left on the 11 train. Just after luncheon, Burke, the butler, was taken unexpectedly with a pain in his right side, much worse when I was within hearing distance, and by afternoon he was started cityward. That night the cook's sister had a baby. The cook, seeing indecision in my face, made it twins on second thought. And to be short, by noon the next day the household staff was down to Liddy and myself. And this in a house with 22 rooms and 5 baths. Liddy wanted to go back to the city at once, but the milk boy said that Thomas Johnson, the Armstrongs' colored butler, was working as a waiter at the Greenwood Club and might come back. I have the usual scruples about coercing people's servants away, but few of us have any conscience regarding institutions or corporations. Witness the way we about coercing people's servants away, but few of us have any conscience regarding institutions or corporations. Witness the way we, Thomas. Well, it ended by my engaging Thomas on the spot at outrageous wages and with permission to sleep in the gardener's lodge, empty since the house was rented. The old man, he was white-haired and a little stooped, but with an immense idea of his personal dignity, gave me his reasons hesitatingly. "I ain't saying nothing, Miss Innes," he said with his hand on the doorknob, "but there's been goings on here this last few months as ain't natural. 'Tain't one thing and 'tain't another. It's just a door squealin' here and a winder closin' there. But when doors and winders gets to cuttin' up capers and there's nobody nigh 'em, it's time Thomas Johnson sleeps somewheres else." Liddy, who seemed to be never more than 10 feet away from me that night and was afraid of her shadow in that great barn of a place, screamed a little and turned a yellow-green. But I am not easily alarmed. It was entirely in vain. I represented to Thomas that we were alone, and that he would have to stay in the house that night. He was politely firm, but he would come over early the next morning, and if I gave him a key, he would come in time to get some sort of breakfast. I stood on the huge veranda and watched him shuffle along down the shadowy drive, with mingled feelings, irritation at his cowardice, and thankfulness at getting him at all. I am not ashamed to say that I double-locked the hall door when I went in. "You can lock up the rest of the house and go to bed, Liddy," I said severely. "You give me the creeps standing there. A woman of your age ought to have better sense." It usually braces Liddy to mention her age. She owns to 40, which is absurd. Her mother cooked for my grandfather, and Liddy must be at least as old as I. But that night she refused to brace. "You're not going to ask me to lock up, Miss Rachel?" she quavered. "Why, there's a dozen French windows in the drawing room and the billiard room wing, and everyone opens on a porch. And Mary Ann said that last night there was a man standing by the stable when she locked the kitchen door." "Mary Ann was a fool," I said sternly. "If there had been a man there, she would have had him in the kitchen and been feeding him what was left from dinner, inside of an hour from force of habit. Now don't be ridiculous. Lock up the house and go to bed." I am going to read illustration. But Liddy set her lips tight and stood still. "I'm not going to bed," she said. "I am going to pack up, and tomorrow I am going to leave." "You'll do nothing of the sort," I snapped. "Liddy and I often desire to part company, but never at the same time. If you are afraid, I will go with you, but for goodness sake, don't try to hide behind me." The house was a typical summer residence on an extensive scale. Wherever possible on the first floor, the architect had done away with partitions, using arches and columns instead. The effect was cool and spacious, but scarcely cozy. As Liddy and I went from one window to another, our voices echoed back at us uncomfortably. There was plenty of light. The electric plant down in the village supplied us. But there were long vistas of polished floor and mirrors which reflected us from unexpected corners, until I felt some of Liddy's foolishness communicate itself to me. The house was very long, a rectangle in general form, with the main entrance in the center of the long side. The brick-paved entry opened into a short hall to the right of which, separated only by a row of pillars, was a huge living room. Beyond that was the drawing room, and in the end, the billiard room. Off the billiard room, in the extreme right wing, was a den, or card room, with a small hall opening on the east veranda, and from there went up a narrow circular staircase. Halsey had pointed it out with delight. "Just look, Aunt Rachel," he said with a flourish. "The architect that put up this joint was wise to a few things. Arnold Armstrong and his friends could sit here and play cards all night and stumble up to bed in the early morning without having the family send in a police call. Liddy and I got as far as the card room and turned on all the lights. I tried the small entry door there, which opened on the veranda, and examined the windows. Everything was secure, and Liddy, a little less nervous now, had just pointed out to me the disgracefully dusty condition of the hardwood floor, when suddenly the lights went out. We waited a moment. I think Liddy was stunned with fright, or she would have screamed, and then I clutched her by the arm and pointed to one of the windows opening on the porch. The sudden change threw the window into relief, an oblong of grayish light, and showed us a figure standing close, peering in. As I looked, it darted across the veranda and out of sight in the darkness. A link cuff button. Liddy's knees seemed to give away under her. Without a sound, she sank down, leaving me staring at the window in petrified amazement. Liddy began to moan under her breath, and in my excitement I reached down and shook her. "Stop it," I whispered. "It's only a woman, maybe a maid of the Armstrongs. Get up and help me find the door." She groaned again. "Very well," I said. "Then I'll have to—" She moved at that, and holding to my sleeve, we felt our way, with numerous collisions, to the billiard room, and from there to the drawing room. The lights came on then, and with the long French windows unshuttered, I had a creepy feeling that each one sheltered a peering face. In fact, in the light of what happened afterward, I am pretty certain we were under surveillance during the entire ghostly John Bailey had known Paul Armstrong intimately. He did not believe that the money was gone. In fact, it was hardly possible in the dinner. Bailey felt sure there was a hidden room at Sunnyside. He tried to see the architect of the building, but, like the contractor, if he knew of such a room, he refused any information. It was Halsey's idea that John Bailey come to the house as a gardener and pursue his investigations as he could. His smooth upper lip had been sufficient disguise, with his change of clothes and a haircut by a country barber. So it was Alex Jack Bailey who had been our ghost. Not only had he alarmed Louise and himself, he admitted, on the circular staircase, but he had dug the hole in the trunk room wall and later sent Eliza into hysteria. The note Liddy had found in Gertrude's scrap basket was from him, and it was he who had startled me into unconsciousness by the clothes chute, and, with Gertrude's help, had carried me to Louise's hymn. And it was he who had startled me into unconsciousness by the clothes chute, and, with Gertrude's help, had carried me to Louise's. That old Thomas had seen his master and thought he had seen the Sunnyside ghost. There could be no doubt. Of that story of Thomas's, about seeing Jack Bailey in the footpath between the club and Sunnyside, the night Liddy and I heard the noise on the circular staircase, that, too, was right. On the night before Arnold Armstrong was murdered, Jack Bailey had made his first attempt to search for the secret room. He secured Arnold's keys from his room at the club and got into the house, armed with a golf stick for sounding the walls. He ran against the hamper at the head of the stairs, caught his cufflink in it, and dropped the golf stick with a crash. He was glad enough to get away without an alarm being raised, and he took the owl train to town. The oddest thing to me was that Mr. Jameson had known for some time that Alex was Jack Bailey, but the face of the pseudo-gardener was very queer indeed. When that night in the card room, the detective turned to him and said, "How long are you and I going to play our little comedy, Mr. Bailey?" Underscore. Well, it is all over now. Paul Armstrong rests in Casanova churchyard, and this time there is no mistake. I went to the funeral because I wanted to be sure he was really buried, and I looked at the step of the shaft where I had sat that night and wondered if it was all real. Sunnyside is for sale. No, I shall not buy it. Little Lucian Armstrong is living with his step-grandmother, and she is recovering gradually from troubles that had extended over the entire period of her second marriage. Anne Watson lies not far from the man she killed and who has surely caused her death. Thomas, the fourth victim of the conspiracy, is buried on the hill. With Nina Carrington, 5 lives were sacrificed in the course of this grim conspiracy. There will be 2 weddings before long, and Liddy has asked for my heliotrope poplin to wear to the church. I knew she would. She has wanted it for 3 years, and she was quite ugly the time I spilled coffee on it. We are very quiet, just the 2 of us. Liddy still clings to her ghost theory and points to my wet and muddy boots in the trunk room as proof. I am gray, I admit, but I haven't felt as well in a dozen years. Sometimes when I am bored, I ring for Liddy and we talk things over. When Warner married Rosie, Liddy sniffed and said what I took for faithfulness in Rosie had been nothing but mawkishness. I have not yet outlived Liddy's contempt because I gave them silver knives and forks as a wedding gift. So we sit and talk, and sometimes Liddy threatens to leave, and often I discharge her, but we stay together somehow. I am talking of renting a house next year, and Liddy says to be sure there is no ghost, to be discharge her, but we stay together somehow. I am talking of renting a house next year, and Liddy says to be sure there is no ghost, to be another summer. Liddy is having the awnings put up, and the window box is filled. Liddy or no Liddy, I shall advertise tomorrow for a house in the country, and I don't care if it has a circular staircase. Thank you for joining us in this classic mystery from Mary Roberts Rinehart. As the secrets of the circular staircase unfold, we are left with more questions than answers. But one thing is certain, mystery always keeps us coming back for more. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling detective tales. Until next time, keep the curiosity alive and remember, nothing